Thank you for joining the Nonprofit Learning Lab for today's workshop. If you have any questions along the way for our presenters, you can type them into the GoToWebinar chat box, likely found on the right-hand side of your screen. If you have any tech questions, you can type them there as well. Without further ado, I will now hand it over to you, Annisa.
Thank you. I think we're starting with a poll, right? So I just want to get a sampling of what everybody is, where everybody is coming from today. I much appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. And I, hope that everybody gets something out of this. While you are, after you've answered the poll, please feel free to put your name and location and favorite St. Patrick's Day treat in the chat. How are we doing on the poll there?
Yep, we have about 60% of participants voted, with 33% at A, 18% at B, 24% at C, 10% at D, and 14% at E. Okay, although that's shifting as I'm saying it.
All right, but it seemed to be pretty split between the first three, yeah?
Yes, and the last one.
Okay, so nobody's got something older that collects dust.
8% of people.
Well, that is good. We will hopefully be able to address those last two. There now I'm seeing it. A strategic 37, 18, a strategic plan that was updated 1836. So that's great. Over 50% of you have a relatively current strategic plan. Great. So why are we here today? Again, thank you for taking time out of your day. We are here to identify which strategic planning documents or tools require adjustments when the environment shifts, and to compare and contrast ones and how they can help your nonprofits adapt their strategies differently. So, I'm obviously having, okay, so how do you approach change? Most people approach change in one of three ways, right? First, I like to think of change as a pothole. If you are in most of the, I think most of the Midwest and whatnot, got a lot of snow today. We're used to potholes. It is that season. So what do you do when you hit a pothole? There's three ways you can approach it. First, you can think about all the options and what to do next, right? We call this analysis paralysis. It is not a problem. This is perfectly natural reaction to change sometimes. You just want to make sure you don't get hung up here very long. A second way to approach change is to ignore it and hope it goes away. Usually that is not a very helpful response. At least in analysis paralysis, we're coming up with different options. What we want to be doing, right, is adapting to change and keep going. So that's what we're going to talk about, tools today that will help you adapt and keep going. So I've got a second poll to pop up. The pothole I'm thinking about during this training is 1, loss of government funding, whether it's federal, state, local. 2, shifting foundation priorities. 3, decrease in private funding, foundations, individual, corporate. Legislative changes that impact our missions, or manpower shortages, or changes, I suppose, either staff or volunteer changes. So I just want everybody to kind of think about what, what stressor they're facing right now while we go through this. And I will let me know when there's enough to give, start looking at answers.
Yeah, I think we'll leave it open for another couple seconds here. Probably 5 more seconds if anybody wants to vote.
We have no votes?
No. Okay. I meant last minute.
That's interesting. Okay. Oh, actually, great. Okay, so 23. So about 50% are looking at funding changes, shifting priorities of foundations, legislative changes, and manpower shortages at 27%. That is good to know. Thank you. So I spoke about why we are here today, but why me? So I have 25 years experience working with mission-driven organizations around the globe, right? And so I've spent a large portion of my life working in very unpredictable environments, whether we're talking about, massive, unpredictable economies, unpredictable governments, or war. I've spent a large portion of my life pivoting when it comes to the work that I'm doing. So that's one of the reasons that I feel that I can help you all today. Before we get going, I want to make sure we're using some common language. I'll use the word strategic plan, strategic framework for strategic planning tools, all kind of interchangeably throughout the next 25, 30 minutes. But I want to make sure that we're all talking, we're all on the same page about what a strategic plan is. Now, if you Google on, if you just run it into Google, you'll run up 9 times out of 10 with a definition something like this: a comprehensive roadmap that outlines an organization's long-term goals, key priorities, and the specific actions needed to achieve them. I really can't stand this definition because it's very static, right? I think the 8%, or no, can't remember, it's about 20%, that had on a shelf, I think, that hasn't, or no, you're about 8% on a shelf and did nothing, right? If you keep looking, right, they get better, the more you dig in. But with my clients, I've kind of developed our own working tool when we start working on a strategic plan together. A strategic plan is a living document intended to provide ongoing direction for your organization by laying out actionable goals and allocating resources. Right? We work through the strategic plan by first analyzing the operating environment. We prioritize our goals. We set our actions and our targets. We implement. We evaluate. And this is all to say, like, the most important thing to me, the most important reason for me to have a strategic plan is so that when things change, right, you have a tool that will help you make those decisions. Now, strategic plans are made up. They're going to address who we are, why we exist, what we prioritize, how we're going to achieve our goals, and when we're going to do things. And each of these WH questions, right, has a variety of options that can come under it. So what tools do we use to make up these different parts? Don't try to write these down or anything, you'll get slides. But there's different tools we use for each stage of that, for each stage of a strategic plan or each section of a strategic plan. And so today we're going to try to go through as many of these as we can get possible, right? So we're going to start with tools for prioritization and decision making. Now you can use these for any stage in the strategic plan. I wanted to talk about them a little bit here, though, at the beginning, because of what we're talking about, right? I said in the beginning, a lot of us can get stuck in this analysis paralysis, and there's nothing wrong with it. Like I said, it's very common when we have the massive shocks that we've had over the last 5 years, but we don't want to get stuck there too long. And so how do we make sure we get out of it? So one of the tools I use personally quite regularly is the Eisenhower matrix, right? This is a very simple tool that we can use to kind of identify what we have on our list that's urgent or not, and an emergency or not. Things that are both urgent and an emergency, right? We do those first. If they are neither, we get rid of them. If it's nothing is an emergency or urgent, we delete it. We can also decide and delegate, right? Put things off later and delegate. Like I said, I use this for my own planning. I also use it a lot with my coaching clients as they're trying to set priorities for what they want to do next. given the examples that we started with, right, when we were thinking about our potholes, I thought I'd just give you a little actionable, see how this fills in, right, on, you know, the potholes that we were thinking about earlier. So if something is like, I kind of answered these from the standpoint of an executive director. We're a small to mid-sized organization, right? You have to have enough people to delegate to, at least. So is something loss of government funding or legislative changes, to me, are things that are very urgent and in the emergency zone. Things that are also very important that we need to think about, but we may want to schedule a time for, are shifting priorities of foundations and decreasing donations, the corporate, the private money. And you might ask why government funding goes here and private funding goes over here. Typically, I see government funding as larger chunks of our budgets with most of my clients. So that's why I consider it more urgent than the private monies. Something you want to think about delegating as an executive director is your decreasing volunteer base or staffing issues that you have. And finally, one of the other options I originally had in my poll, but you can only have 5 options, was increased competition for grants, right? As we are all feeling funding crunches, the competition has moved up, and I've kind of just, you know, it's a delete. It's not something we can spend time on. The most we can do is write our, you know, make our best cases for funders. Now, another great tool to use, this helps with the number of you that said that you had staffing changes. I think hopefully you'll find this is very helpful. This is a Reiki Eraser chart. It's very important if your moments of change are about staffing, right? If you have something like this for your organization, it can help new staff get up to speed quicker to find out where they get in. Or if you are missing staff, you can look very clearly about what holes are being, you know, what communication holes are being, you know, gaps you may have until you get that position filled, right? So this is a responsibility / internal communication matrix. And it outlines you know, who's responsible for each item, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed. Now I filled it out for a one of my clients. It's they've got about 6 full-time staff and about 10 part-time staff, and they do a lot of case management, right? So program goals, right? The executive director is responsible. Social service director is accountable. Case manager is consulted. The comms are informed. Comms team is informed. At the same time, when you're talking about client files, right? It's a heavy case management organization. The social services director is going to be responsible, right? The case manager is accountable. The executive director, consultant informed, and comms probably has nothing to do with case management. But finally, if you look at social media posts, it goes the opposite direction, right? Comms is both responsible and accountable. Everybody else is consultant and informed. A MOCA chart is something else that I've used. Depending on your organizational chart and your structure, some people find MOCA a little more usable. And it's the same concept, except across what you're filling out is who's the manager, who's the owner, who's consulted, who's the helper, and who's the approver. All right. So hopefully if you start getting, you know, these are tools that can help with your immediate decision making or filling in some immediate gaps. And then I want to take a couple seconds. Sorry, I'm going to breathe first. Next, I want to take a second to talk about some tools for analyzing. SWOT is probably familiar to most of you. For those of you that aren't sure, the quick definition is it's just a quick graphic way to organize our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, both internal and external things that affect our organizations. I know over the last 10 years or so, a lot of people have started moving away from SWOTs because they want something more asset-based and they don't like weaknesses and threats. But if the last 5 years have told us anything, these external problems can seriously impact us. So I have always remained a big fan of the SWOT over the SOAR or anything else. And I filled out this example here this is from a strategic plan from a client that I worked with in 2020-21 to develop a 3-year strategic plan. As you can guess, they are a Main Street organization. They get most of their funds from sponsorships for events, as well as beer sales at events, and they get some grants and some SSA money from the city, and they spend it on business development, right? Whether it's advertising or training for their member clients, as well as beautification projects in the downtown area to draw people downtown. And so they went through this process in 2021. In 2024, they came back again and they were like, our 3-year plan is done. We would like to update it. We don't think we need a whole new plan. We don't need to go through everything again, but how can you work with us to do this? And so one of the first things we did was to sit down with the board, and the executive director sent out the strategic plan to all of the team. And just to note here, in 2021, they had no staff. They had a board chair that did a significant amount of the work. By 2024, the board chair had actually transitioned into a paid executive director. And so there was a new board chair. And the team, the board came prepared very well. So they were instructed to kind of read through the strategic plan and just think about things that needed to be updated, changed, things they wanted to remain the same. So we had planned for a couple hours at a board meeting to do this. I think we ended up getting it done in about 90 minutes. And we literally just went through and they told us what needed to be crossed out and what needed to be added. So added is in the orange here. Crossed out are things that didn't relate anymore. And yeah, it ended up being, because they were all prepared, it ended up being a very quick process. I think we used maybe 60 to 90 minutes tops when we had allotted much more. I also love the fact that they were, the executive director, they still relied on this person too much, but they were very insistent to make sure that to show that they'd improved over the last 3 years, right? In 2021, they probably would have fallen apart had she left. Now they were in a much better position to continue on without her. She still did, 50 to 60% of the work, but they no longer feared collapse. Pastel is a similar type of organization. I don't usually put these in my strategic plans, but I like to have it along when I'm thinking about my SWOTs, right? We want to make sure that we're thinking of all the possible things that could be impacting our organization positively or negatively, right? So I filled out some of the same examples from the East Moline strategic plan, right? But what are the political implications? What are the economic implications of what's happening? How are changes in social networks around us affecting us? Technological changes, environmental changes, and legal changes. And I think that's something we've seen a lot over the last couple of years as well. Just checking on my time. All right, so that's tools for analyzing. Let's look at a couple tools for actions. How are activities being effective? People don't think about grant proposals nearly enough as strategic documents. When I was a programs person, implementing programs, I used to hate grant writing because it was something I had to do on top of my already, 50 to 60 hour work week, right? It turns out when I became a consultant that I really enjoyed writing grants because they're mini strategic plans, right? And grant proposals and strategic plans are interlinked, right? A good strategic plan can help you write a grant proposal. And when you're working on a new strategic plan, you can kind of think about what proposals that you've been submitting, how they've changed since your last strategic plan in order to inform a strategic plan as well. So, oh, I did not hit the next button. Okay, so grant proposals are made up of, we're all familiar with the different sections, right? The ones on the left are ones that are unlikely to change when the environment shifts around us, but the ones on the right are very likely to change. So again, I'm going to use East Moline Main Street as an example. Again, we went through our SWOTs, and then I spent an hour with the executive director going over the different parts of the plan that was going to affect them. Starting with assumptions and challenges, right? Our SWOT, our assumptions and challenges will be affected by changes in our SWOT. Our activities and timelines and evaluation plan would be the next step. And like I said, the board gave me written notes or verbal notes about what they wanted to see changed in all of these, and then we sat down with the executive director to make sure everything was accounted for in the updated, refreshed strategic plan. Logic models are another tool that we have. Sometimes as part of a strategic plan, sometimes as part of a grant proposal, and they follow the same structure, a similar structure to a grant proposal, right? So when our environment shifts, we're going to want to see which of our external factors and assumptions are the same, and then how they affect our input, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. Finally, work plans. I am a total geek. These are my favorite things. Because it's simply a visual representation of what we're going to do and when, right? So we have our objectives, our activities, and this is the updated, so this is the refreshed version from East Moline Main Street again. Same way as before, right? Items you need to add, we added in orange. Things that no longer were necessary, we crossed out. One thing that's a little different on the work plans, right, is we make sure we highlight things that we've completed, right? It's important to celebrate when we look back at these strategic plans. For the 8% or so that have it sitting on a shelf, look at it every 6 months and say, ooh, what have we completed? What are we still doing right? What have we completed? At the very least, if we're not using it as a tool to guide our work, we could at least be using it to make sure that we're meeting our goals. Now, if for that 14% they have absolutely nothing to update, I would consider starting a score document. And this is, whoever's your strategic planning team is, right? If it's the executive director and the board, you've got an executive team, you've got a couple program staff, whoever the people that you brainstorm with, right? Whoever, you talk about, when you're at the, in the lunchroom, you're still talking about programs and brainstorming with your teammates. This is the group you want to get together and just start mapping out a SOAR. I mentioned these briefly earlier as something that people were using as an alternative to SWOT, right? Because it's more positive and forward-looking. But like I said, I think without the threats, I don't think it's a complete picture. But instead of opportunities or weaknesses and threats, they have looked at aspirations, right, which are really your long-term goals, and results, your outcomes, your outputs, outcomes, impacts over there. And yeah, this is a good place to start if you have nothing and really need to be thinking about getting some documentation in place. So as anything else, I'm going to go back to our objectives. I hope you have been reminded of some tools and documents that you already have that you could think about adjusting when moments of change happens, and how you can use each of these differently to adapt your strategies during moments of change. We're going to put up poll number 3 now, which is very, very similar to the first poll, right? I still have one. Maybe you've been reminded of you don't have a strategic plan, but you do have some of these tools lying around somewhere that you could update and use to help make decisions as the environment shifts. So let's see what we've got going. While you guys are filling out that poll, I was going to try to go to the next slide, but I apparently cannot because I have to wait for the poll to finish.
Okay, we're about 30 seconds in and votes keep trickling in, so
Okay.
I'll leave it up for
A couple more seconds. Yeah.
about 15 more seconds, yeah.
While we are waiting for people to finish voting, I'll just talk to you a little bit about myself. So I mentioned at the beginning, I've spent 25 years working with nonprofits around the globe. My consulting business, oh, we've got our tools back. Okay, so nothing of the sort went up, which is interesting. But something, this is what I was looking for, something older which collects dust went down. Oh, and I think more people must have answered because many more people have stuff that they've updated in the last couple months. Great, thank you. So yeah, about my consulting business, I work with small and mid-sized nonprofits to develop solutions to strategic planning and project management challenges. I boost program effectiveness, and I tell powerful stories. My contact information is there. You can give me a call, schedule a call to do a free little brainstorm, and a QR code will send you to all of those things. I also want to take a second to thank Nonprofit Learning Lab for having me here. I'm a member of the Association of Consultants for Nonprofits. We work with the Nonprofit Learning Lab to make sure at least one of our consultants is providing one of these webinars for you every month. And we've got a couple minutes for questions. So I'm going to see if there are any questions in the box.
We have quite a few.
Oh, goodness. Okay. I am not seeing them in my chart.
In your questions tab?
Yeah.
Huh. I can read them out.
So
the last question that we got was, there's a struggle when you have a newer strategic plan that collects dust, i.e. no one is referring to it, and having it guide their decision making. Is there any advice on how to manage that?
to manage it collecting dust.
To manage a newer strategic plan that it seems that like they're not getting buy-in on.
They're not getting buy-in on. I suppose it depends on how new. If it's within the last, if it's more than, I'd say 12 months old, you can absolutely start looking at a refresh and take it out during board meetings or team plannings and say, hey, let's look at this section for 15 minutes today. Which of these things are still valid and which have changed, right? It has been a very dramatic 12 months for all of us. More when you get into COVID and donor shifts because of tax changes and tariffs and et cetera, et cetera. But my bigger concern is why there was no buy-in to begin with. So most likely it's because they didn't feel like they were part of the process in setting the plan. So making sure that they are involved in the refreshing, I think, would be the way I would approach it first.
Cool. Okay. Yes, the slides will be shared. I'll have more information on that in a second. Um, how have you seen charities strategically plan for the public support test? We're coming into our 5th year.
The public's, I think I need more information on, I don't want to answer, I don't want to interpret what they mean by the public support test.
Okay.
That person wants to elaborate or.
Other things I'm seeing are uh, just different context of answers for things in the polls. So we can go ahead and end that there, and I'll answer everyone's question of whether or not the slides will be recorded. So first, Annisa, if you have any final thoughts for our participants, now would be a good time to share them.
No, I just thank you all for attending today and giving us your time. Feel free to reach out, contact me if you have any questions or just want to chit chat. I'm happy always to do introductory calls and just kind of brainstorm with people.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Annisa. This workshop has now come to a close. If you are interested in receiving the recording materials from today's workshop, you can download them on the bottom of our free webinar page, probably by the end of day tomorrow, or email us at program@nonprofitlearninglab.org. Thank you so much for participating. And again, thank you, Annisa, for educating our community.
Thanks all. Have a great week.
Bye, everyone.